Paris was the scene of Hemingway's apprenticeship and arguably of the best years of his life. Though he visited the city many times in his life, he lived here more or less continuously from 1921 to 1928. Here he interacted with a large group of artists and writers who were to have a considerable effect on his formation. Hemingway's Paris was not the Paris of the great buildings or of the tourists. His Paris was the Paris of café society and the artist salon. The city is divided into 20 concentric arrondissements, and Hemingway lived primarily in the 5th and 6th. His Paris was concentrated in the Latin Quarter and the Saint-Germain area, with the Luxembourg Gardens more or less in between. His first accommodation was this hotel in 1921. This was the same building where John Adams, John Jay, and Benjamin Franklin hammered out the details of the peace agreement with the British. Also in residence at the time was Juna Barnes, whose very public lesbianism fascinated him. Actually, it was a few doors down the road at number 56 where the actual treaty was signed. This is Hemingway's first apartment, complete with stirrup toilets at the turn of every stairs and a dance hall at the ground floor. Just around the corner is Rue Descartes, where Hemingway had his writing studio. In The Snows of Kilimanjaro, Hemingway's alter ego, Harry, refers to this neighborhood and says, "There was never another part of Paris that he loved like this." This is his second apartment with Hadley, acquired when they returned in 1924 following the birth of his first son, known as Bumby. This is the apartment where a drunken Scott Fitzgerald attempted to force entry at 3 a.m. and ended up urinating on the front step, much to the chagrin of the concierge. Fitzgerald later wrote to Hemingway, "It's only fair to say that the deplorable man who entered your apartment Saturday night was not me, but a man named Johnson, who is often mistaken for me." This is the more plush apartment in which he lived with his second wife, Pauline Pfeiffer, from 1927 to 1929, and which he retained for a period after he moved to Florida. It was in this apartment that, thinking he was pulling a toilet chain, he pulled a skylight onto his head, and featured in a widely used publicity shot with Sylvia Beach. Just around the corner from this apartment was his favourite church, the largest on the left bank, Saint-Sulpice. He's also known to have attended services in Notre Dame and in the oldest abbey church in Paris, Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Which has the sculpture by Picasso of Homage to Apollinaire outside. The latter church had the additional benefit of being close to a trio of his favourite restaurants, the Café des Fleurs, the Café Les Deux Magots, and Brasserie Lip. Les Deux Magots was a favourite for expat Americans for decades. Samuel Putnam described it as the neutral ground between the left and right banks, and certainly Hemingway enjoyed the company and the views here. Of course, Hemingway frequented many eateries in Paris, including this, his first neighbourhood cafe. But the daddy of them all was this, near the statue of Marshal Ney at the Luxembourg Gardens. It was here that Scott Fitzgerald, at their second meeting, complained that his new novel, The Great Gatsby, was not selling, and asked him to come to Lyon to pick up a car. Here he started his rewrite of The Sun Also Rises, drinking café crèmes at his favourite spot at the bar. Some other places of note. Gertrude Stein, seen here with her godchild, Bumby Hemingway, lived in this apartment. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, when they weren't on the Riviera, lived here. A drunken James Joyce was brought home by Hemingway to his corner apartment here in a wheelbarrow. Hemingway spent hours here studying Cézanne. This is Sylvia Beach, Hemingway's guardian angel in Paris, outside the original Shakespeare and Company shop. This is her with Joyce and Adrien Monnier, her lover and French translator of Hemingway's books. This is the original building today, where Ulysses was first published. And this is today's Shakespeare and Company, located in the shadow of Notre Dame. The bookstore continues its tradition of supporting struggling writers, including living accommodation for up to 12. Incidentally, Sylvia Beach closed Shakespeare and Company forever at the end of 1941 and was interned by the Germans during World War II, and upon her release hid in this building, a student hostel, for the duration of the war. Well, of course I know he drank, so here are a few of his favorite drinking establishments. Hemingway said, "When I had money, I went to the Crillon." Prominently located in the elegant Place de la Concorde and used as headquarters of the German High Command in World War II, it was reputed to have the longest bar in Europe at the time. It features in several of his stories, including The Sun Also Rises and The Snows of Kilimanjaro. Later, when he was more successful, he would frequent the small bar in the Ritz Hotel in the Place Vendôme. The Ritz was later used by the Germans in World War II for VIP visitors, and Hemingway, by now a famous and larger-than-life figure, vowed to liberate it from them. On the 25th of August 1944, as Paris underwent its own uprising, Hemingway, officially a reporter for Collier's, became unofficial leader of a group of up to 200 French partisans and was amongst the early outsiders to enter the city. Dodging occasional sniper fire, he proceeded directly to the hotel bar, having already consumed at least 2 bottles of champagne. The hotel manager explained that they had hidden the precious Cheval Blanc Grand Cru from the Germans. These were obtained and consumed on the spot. He and his group went to the roof of the hotel and fired their weapons, only succeeding in shooting down some clotheslines. Later, Jean-Paul Sartre and his companion Simone de Beauvoir joined him, and there is considerable evidence that de Beauvoir spent the night with them. This is the Ritz today as it undergoes a 2-year upgrade. But of his favorite drinking places, Harry's New York bar was certainly the daddy of them all. This is a genuine Manhattan bar that was dismantled and shipped to Paris in 1911, and in 1923 was acquired by its Scottish barman, Harry McElhone, who named it Harry's Bar. Folks, this is the bar where the Bloody Mary, the White Lady, and most importantly, the sidecar were invented. Just about anybody who's anybody has drunk here, including Rita Hayworth, Humphrey Bogart, Clint Eastwood, the Duke of Windsor, to name just a few. It features in the James Bond story A View to a Kill, and George Gershwin composed An American in Paris here. Hemingway used to love to walk the banks of the Seine, past Les Boucagnes, those second-hand book and art sellers licensed since 1649 to operate along both sides of the Seine out of their very defined green boxes. He also loved to stroll through the Luxembourg Gardens, anchored by the Luxembourg Palace, home of the French Senate, at one end, including the original model for the Statue of Liberty, and ultimately to the fountains of the observatory and good old Marshall Ney at the other end. As you stroll through the streets of Hemingway's Latin Quarter, Paris continually surprises. The Cafe Society, even in October, is palpable. City of Light. City of Love. A movable feast indeed.